Welcome, everybody, to Wild Medicine for Recovery. I'm Rodasi Campbell, and today I have with me someone that has been an incredible guiding light in my life. Um, Narain Ishaya is an author, and he was a teacher trainer in my experience, a coach, a guide, a mentor. He's a father and a husband, and just someone who has held a lot of space and service to what I'm just going to call the awakening of the heart or the awakening of humanity. Um, he may have a different bio that he would have shared, but that's my bio for him. Uh, Narayan, I wanted to start with your perspective on how we met, and then that story can tie into a lot of the questions that I have for you today that I think will support the folks who are watching. If you'd be willing to just share how it is that is your perspective of how we know one another.
Well, that's a long story, isn't it? But but the most recent version of events would be that we met through the community that is the Ascension community, and specifically at the kind of core of it, which is the teacher training process, or what became known as the mastery of the self, where it's a deep dive meditation experience. Um, but but I met you through both of our interaction with that community, which was amazing. You know what I mean? I mean, to be around anywhere upward of 100 people at any one time who are, you know, consciously connecting with the greatest part of themselves, really, um, and doing so for the most part with ease and grace or whatever. But that's the nutshell version of where I remember us meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. You know, your wife Erin and I were born in Michigan about 9 days apart in the same year. And both came to the Ishayas. I learned Ascension in 1999, and you two were like these mythic figures. I arrived in North Carolina at the training facility there. You two had just left at some point not too long before that. I arrived at a center in England at some point. You two had just left there. I kept kind of like over the years missing you, and then took space from to kind of like enter into householdership and become a mother and all of those things. And my reintegration to return back to that more completely and to re-engage in teacher training process is when I finally met the two of you in 2010 in Spain. And and I love that you said in the beginning that it's a long story because as I've said to you several times, and is the truth for me that I've known you and her since the beginning of time. I've known you in all time and space. And and then as people, you both have been such guiding lights for me into trusting this experience that's beyond the identification of the mind, of the roles, of everything, while simultaneously falling in love with this character that I get to experience here. That is me.
Right.
Um, I wonder if we could, and I've seen you do that for many people, Narayan, and I believe that that's going to happen here today too. What is the teaching of the Ishayas and what is ascension? Are they two different things? And why would anybody care about either of them?
There's a lot of big questions in that opening question. Let's come to the third one first. Why would anybody care? They need not, right? It's not mandatory. There's a lot of people who hear about it and just go, meh, doesn't really ring my bell, you know? And I think part of that is when you answer the first two questions a little more completely, that bell gets rung for people in a much bigger way. Because oh my goodness me. Okay, so the teaching of the Ishayas is not owned by the Ishayas, right? Because it's ultimately comes down to a very, very ancient principle where it means they will call it the teaching of the one, right? Meaning that all of us are connected in this field of one thing, right? All of us are an expression of this field of one thing. And we incarnate into these bodies that go along with these personalities that have certain constraints and limitations that are pre-installed almost like software. Right? So we have the hardware of the body that we have, and then we have the software of the mind that we inhabit. And it's through reconciling some of those constraints and some of those limitations that we discover the truth of what our karma really is. Right? So it's really about it's not any one group's teaching, right? But the Ishayas, and that word, as you know, literally translates from the Sanskrit to those who exist to serve the highest level of consciousness. That's what it means. Isha represents that highest level of consciousness that some people would call Christ consciousness. And the Ya on the end means those that not only come from that consciousness but exist to serve it, right? So it's a nice little term that denotes a very, very old and very, very real tradition. And so ascension is two things within that. Ascension is the practice, right, that we have, which is a meditative practice, quite unique in a lot of ways and very, very powerful. But the truth of ascension, and it's what the techniques allow someone to do, is that, you know, I'm just going to go off here for a second because in this personality and in this mind that we inhabit, we live in a linear world in a way. Like we create that, but we live in this illusion of a linear world. And what that means is that it's a progression along a timeline from somewhere to somewhere else. But for most of us, the way that arrives, the way that lands is that there's always somewhere else to get to, right? And it doesn't mean that we can't improve or whatever, but what we're doing from that perspective is that we're running away from the past continuously, a lot of us. And so what we tend to do is recreate different versions of that past over and over and over again. And so growth becomes at best slow and maybe at a less than best place, it becomes more limited. We experience limited growth because we're not releasing ourselves from what we poured ourselves into. We're trying to improve it, right, along that linear timeline. And for me, ascension is a movement out of that linear timeline and into something eternal, right? It's a vertical movement out of the timeline of my beliefs and my limitations and into something truly eternal. And that's the truth of spirituality, right? Is beginning to access a version of myself, beginning to access a self that already exists beyond the idea of me, beyond the idea of who I am. That timeline is all generated by the idea of who I am, or more often the idea of who I'm not, right? And so the Ishayas, and there's many, many different groups, don't confuse that with a group, are a reference to a very real lineage, one of several, by the way, that operate from that principle that you're not adding freedom to yourself. You're not adding consciousness to yourself. You're beginning to discover who you can be in the absence of the belief that you're not already that. Right. So that's probably more confusing than it needed to be, but that's what I got right now.
I don't know. May have confused somebody's mind, but it's absolutely riveting for me. And of course, I know the answer to many of these questions for myself, but I never get tired of experiencing the way that you express what it is, what these things are. Um, thank you for that. When you talk about you spoke about the identification of what we with what we are not, and you and I had a private conversation a few days ago, um, that just dislodged something for me that made things even more simple in my experience of resting as that bigger experience. And it was that what, I can be it was in essence you were talking about how we're identified with being this thing on that linear timeline, and we're going to make choices from that to the best of our ability with what we're identified with. And and then having this practice that allows me to disconnect from that ball game and come to a place where that's not happening. And then it's just a completely different experience of, now I'm not a person who's doing a practice and trying to get somewhere with it. There's an experience, there's an experience that's just unfolding. And I am that. That is what is here. And um, so I wonder, you used the word karma earlier, Narain, and I wonder, it's just popping up. We come into this life, we were incarnated here. We believe that we're this thing. We're playing in this linear timeline, like we're like, hey, I'm gonna go to Earth and I'm gonna get like identified with this thing. And like the words like karma and ego, are here for me right now. Um, and then I gotta somehow figure out how to get out of that. Could Yeah, I'm all a little bit getting all over the place with this, but I just wonder if you could say, listen, this is the big question. Why the heck did we incarnate here? What is this? What is this thing? What are we doing? So many people ask the question, why? Why do I exist? What is the point of life? And when you talk about this timeline that goes like this and the identification with that, and then that there's this other possibility, and you know, what is the deal? What is the deal with this matrix that we came into? Why did we come here?
Yeah, I mean that's a beautiful angle to want to take there, right? And in some way, and I know you don't mean it like this, but in some way the flaw is in the question, like is so often the case. I don't mean that finger pointed towards you directly, but in general, one of the things that has become apparent to me is that oftentimes the error is in the question, like because the, because when you truly know that existence is about embracing that what you're doing is, see, spirituality is just a game of identity, right? And I think we mentioned that when we called the other day. But and it doesn't matter whether you're not even considering spirituality, if you're talking about any kind of growth as a being, if you any kind of expansion as a being, and you can take that psychologically or self-help or coaching or whatever people do. I don't know what people do, but if it's going to have an effect, in my experience, it comes down to a shift in identity, right? And that's what that word possibility points to. Like there's a famous school of thought. It's Advaita Vedanta. It's a very directly spiritual path. You know it well. And oftentimes the mechanism of that path is just simply that one question: who am I? Right? It's a question of self-inquiry. It's difficult for a lot of people. It becomes just a mental dog chasing its tail, but the essence of it is valuable. And the reason is because when we're faced what we're pushing up against, when we realize that anything we're bumping up against, anything we have issues with is always rooted to our identity. It's never the thing that's causing us the issue. It's always what the thing means about me. Because all our mind is a meaning making machine, and it mostly makes the meaning out of my own existence, right? But that meaning is often limited. It'd be different if the meaning it made up was that you're just fucking awesome and the whole universe exists. It's a huge playground. Just go at it and have as much fun as you can. There's nothing holding you back at all. But most of us don't live in that container, you know? So, so why are we here? I think that everything that I could possibly say about this is only an analogy, right? It's not exactly this, it's like this. But if you could imagine that at the level of the soul, there's a certain sense of incompletion the possibility that you're not complete somehow. It's a felt sense. It's not the truth. And yet, the magnetic draw, and I can tell you this because it's the way I experienced it. I can't say it's absolutely true, but it's absolutely true in my experience, is that from that pre-existing space of that, when the conditions exist in the physical world to illuminate that and make it possible to release it, they're not magnetically drawn to that experience. That's the whole I chose my birth thing, right? You're drawn to an experience and a set of experiences that will illuminate a pre-existing sense of lack. And underneath all of the human experience in some way, there's an experience of lack in almost everybody. And it plays out in some really simple ways, right? Like, I'm not enough. I'm not worthy of love. Uh, there's not enough. And a big one for a lot of people, and especially in certain communities, is I'm not safe, right? And so what we see in the world, because we drew the experiences to ourselves to illuminate that belief, what we see the world as is evidence for the belief, right? It gives me evidence for the fact that that's true. But there comes a place where we get to a place where you can sense it so viscerally, and yet at the same time with such a clarity of awareness that you can access the possibility that even though it appeared to be true, it may not be absolutely true. And if it's not absolutely true, then what else becomes possible for you? What else becomes revealed within you? And that indescribable movement, when it happens in the moment where it's lit, where everything's really hot, that space can only be called freedom. It's not because that freedom has been added to us. It's because what was blocking it suddenly becomes available, right? Becomes released. It's a release from an idea of myself. And you use the word ego, and the simplest way I can describe ego really is just the idea that I have of myself. And we all have it, right? So far from being like a point of failure or for a place where life isn't working or we're not doing the right thing, when you start to see it like that, maybe, just maybe, that's the opportunity that we came here for in the first place. And oftentimes spirituality becomes a beautiful way of avoiding the very reason we were born.
Mhm. Mhm. You and I both have experienced that, right?
Yes.
Could you speak into that just a little bit, Narain? Things, I mean, you've seen thousands and thousands of people, I think, now, and watched your own self where, let's call it a pitfall or just like a trip in the matrix, or I don't know, whatever, where that happens, where spirituality is what you just described, that it can be the block, or it can be the thing where you're avoiding what you came here to do in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a tricky thing. It's a very individual thing. This is all about the approach. But oftentimes, say, for instance, um, a habitual pattern can present itself over and over again. And so, because we've taken up maybe in some way some spiritual context, it can be like, that's just a thought. That's just a thought. So we start to reject it, right? And it keeps coming back. And a lot of times through these, it feels like it should have been much longer than 25 years of doing this, but sometimes it feels like a long time, doesn't it? And sometimes it feels like the blink of an eye. But oftentimes, one of the biggest blocks for people would be exactly that. I shouldn't be having this thought. Like somehow they're doing something wrong to have that particular pattern come up, when maybe it keeps coming back because there's something in it you haven't seen. So the first step is to recognize that true spirituality or any approach to personal growth is about becoming big enough as a being to let it all in, right? Not to be stuck in it. That's not a fault if that happens, right? But it's to become big enough as a being to let all of it in. Freedom is a space which allows all of this. And the true growth is about being able to see that and recognize what you previously believed about yourself that may no longer actually be true.
Mm. Mm.
So some
Yeah,
of the
I
most
just
valuable shifts that I've done, just seeing in myself and in other people, have been like, it's great with meditation invaluable. Absolutely do it. And this one, I could recommend nothing higher than the practice of ascension. But sometimes it's in dialogues like this, one-on-one interactions with people, where a shift can occur that can change someone's entire perspective to their life.
Mm, mm.
Right. And it's something that's so, I don't know what the word for it is really. Um, it feels like a huge blessing to be able to bear witness to that.
It is. It's like a privilege. It feels like the highest honor. Um, it's really stunning. A great fulfillment. So, so many good things, and I feel like the relief that comes from somebody who's seeking and really desperate to improve their experience of life and love themselves and break free from limiting patterns, damaging patterns. Somebody who's been out there totally identified with being the one who's like working really hard on all of that and uh, you know, taking, approaching it like a warrior and like really beating themselves with their practice and their personal growth. And can you just, I mean, did you have a point in your journey where you were doing that and then you recognized you didn't need to do that anymore? Where a softness and a surrender came in?
Yeah, as you're asking that question, I can, there's like 12 of them popped into my mind because it's, I've been pretty hard on myself for most of my life. So that kept coming up, right? But I think probably the biggest one was, I think the first one was when I actually learned the ascension techniques. I think on that, it was a weekend course. And on the second day of the course, the teachers were talking about thought and talking about how it could never be a block to peace, right? And they talked about it at length, that thought was actually something not only that wasn't my fault, but that it was in some ways required. And and I heard it. I really heard it. And I'd done lots of meditation before, but there was always this struggle because I was trying to get to some perfected experience, you know what I mean? And by
Mhm.
perfected experience, it was really what I meant by that. And this is one of those spiritual contexts. What I meant by that was just one that I liked, right? One that I personally preferred. And and that changed a lot for me in terms of like my approach to at least just the practice. But I'll tell you something, a bigger one than that was in, it was Christmas Day, I think, 2019, and I was at lunch with some friends. We hadn't eaten yet, and you'll understand why I say that in a moment. And one of my friends looked at me and said, "Hey, man, you don't look like you're doing so good." And I said, "Yeah, you know what? I don't feel very good. I'm going to go outside for a walk." And I got up and my heart was racing so fast and then dropping to really low rates. And I've always had like a pulse rate, resting pulse rate of about 60, 61. This was unusual and I started feeling really bad. And so, in my experience, at some point over that lunch, everything disappeared, right? Like my life disappeared. It's not like it, when I say disappeared, that's not correct because it wasn't that it had gone somewhere. All of a sudden, it had never been there. There was no memory of it. There was no connection with anything. There was just this pristine, indescribable, original state. There was nothing in it. There was no mechanism to even go, wow, this is amazing. There was nothing. And yet there was everything. And in some moment, I felt a very violent movement in my chest. It gave me back awareness of the body, and then everything started putting itself back together again, right? And I saw the life that I did chosen. I saw the path that I was on, the practice I was using. I saw everything in a different way. Everything. But the shift in relation to what you said was this. I knew, because you said earlier, like, how does someone get beyond that? Or people who are struggling really hard to get beyond their stuff. And oftentimes the desire to get beyond something is just reinforcing the belief that in reality, you're not already beyond it, right? So the illusion of like doing all the work to get beyond something often is trying to get to a place where it goes away. When in the first step really into discovering something way more magnificent about yourself than you can imagine is to realize that if you let this in, there's a shift in who you feel you are, which is available, right? It's not discovering someone that you haven't previously been. It's recognizing who you were the whole time. So you're no longer being driven by the narrative, right? You have all of the courage and all of the awareness and all of the availability of you, the container of this identity that you by choice poured yourself into for that very moment. So whether you look at it spiritually or whatever, the desire to get to some other place is the denial of the absolute truth, which is you're already exactly where you want to be. What you're looking for is not something else. What you're looking for is you, the real you. And so when you see that, then your approach to everything you do, whatever tool you use, whatever technique you use, whatever coach you go to, or whatever it is, like it changes everything because it's just about discovering who you already are. There's no mistakes in anything.
Mm.
You know, my whole kind of approach to the path for just the first few years I was doing it was I couldn't wait to do it right so that I would get to some other world. And it was all beautiful. It was all about unity and self source universes and all of that stuff. But the reality is I just wanted to get out of here.
Mhm. Yes. Hmm. What's the experience like now?
I'm with every part of myself, I embrace this experience. You know, it includes all of that actually. You know, those other dimensions, those other frequencies of being are perfectly present. I'm crystal clear on that. But I didn't come here to get away from myself. Right? My desire to get out of the world had nothing to do with the world at all. It had everything to do with the idea that I had of myself, right? I no longer need to get away from that. I'm the parts of myself that I previously felt were unlovable. And that's getting easier and easier. Does that make some kind of sense?
Oh, of course it makes sense. Absolutely. I mean, one day in Spain, we had a teachers meeting, and the experience was so alive for me of where I was picking up this identification with a me. And I remember asking you, and I was so engaged with resting as that infinite experience, during that time was so very constant for me. And then I would see these viscerally, like you said, feel these moments of coming out, going towards this me. And I remember asking you, why am I doing that still? Why is that still happening? And the love, the absolute, the absolute love that came out of you as you turned and looked at me and said, this is what you said, and I don't know what you would say today, but this is what you said. You said, you're not doing anything wrong. And until this doesn't serve God anymore, you're going to keep doing it. And I mean, tears pouring down my face from that part that believes, always is there, believing that there's just something not right about me or this life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's deep, isn't it? And it's quite insidious. And that question, why do I keep doing this? Why does this keep coming up? Well, because in some way you haven't yet, and when I say you, I mean all of us, we haven't yet seen the the amount that the investment we have in that version. And that's what I would have meant in some way, and if not, I would say it that way now, because like when will it stop? It'll stop when it no longer serves. Either the juice runs out of it on its own, which a lot of growth just happens through maturity. It just the juice comes out of certain things quite naturally, but for some things that are very core, and you can kind of identify your soul purpose or whatever because of those things that are lifelong things that continuously come back. It's like, well, what's this? If I set that all up, if you set up every part of it, and that's a difficult pill for people to swallow. There's some tragic things that happen in people's lives, and I wouldn't wish them on anybody, myself included. And yet, if I set that all up to reveal a part of myself that I hadn't yet seen, if I set it all up to teach myself something, what would that be? And it's a rhetorical question, but that's how you start to touch on the possibilities of who you can be without rejecting who you've so far believed yourself to be.
So
So
powerful.
rather than fixing something and putting it on the shelf and saying I'm done with that now, what it's more like an embrace, like a mother's embrace, right? It's a very feminine thing that happens. I mean, really feminine,
Mhm.
whereby the part of us which is wounded and hurt and seemingly in our minds sometimes damaged beyond repair, suddenly we have the opportunity to embrace that part of ourselves. So it becomes integrated rather than like healed and moved on from. At every point in my life, who I believe myself to be is still alive inside me. And the thing is just providing it space to have the love that it never felt it had. And I know that's basic in some ways, it's psychology 101, but it's not, it's also a massively spiritual approach. You can't step into a greater version of yourself while you're still living in resistance to the one you've chosen. And that's a big deal.
Mhm.
It's all those manifesting courses that are all over the world. I mean, I don't even use the internet and I see them every day. I'm going to teach you how to manifest. Well, that's you're already manifesting your world perfectly based on who you think you are. Like there's no one manifesting better than anybody else. It's just the filter that it's happening through.
You said to me the other day, you make the highest choice based on you, as in all of us, make the highest choice based on who you believe yourself to be. And then I think you said something like, and that's always, you're always wrong about who you think you are, or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
Can you just share, can you just share, there's two parts to that. Like how beautiful to embrace that I have always made the highest choice with what I had, with what I was working with at that moment. And then also the massive mind-blowing epiphany, like, well, yeah, I'm going to keep repeating that kind of choice because that's the identification I have. But there's something else that can happen as well, right? I mean, so Because we don't, it's not about going, like, well, I'm gonna try to quit doing this thing, or, like working on the thing from the surface of the mind. It's like, how does one shift from trying to do it that way to this embrace that you talked about, and identifying with something greater? How does that happen?
Yeah, and the first step, that's great, man. Your questions are awesome. Yeah, it's some things it serves to just make an immediate physical choice to do your best to stop or reduce a behavior which is really causing you or somebody else damage, right? Like that's, and yet it's not something that works purely in and of itself. If you don't shift who you are for yourself, that's causing that reaction, and it is a reaction, and it's called a reaction because it's to something unconscious. You see, so you can't see anything until you let it into the field of your awareness. So, for instance, I can share this with you. I don't talk out of school, but a lady who no one here and you will never meet was talking to me about smoking cigarettes and talking about how bad it was, how she wanted to get rid of it because it was bad and because it was stupid. And okay, I understand that reasoning in one sense, but also, is it really? I've got friends who are happy they smoke cigarettes because they used to do heroin. They don't see it as a bad thing. The physics of it are that the little thing that you light up is neither bad nor good in reality, is it? It has no value other than the value we give it. So the question isn't whether the smoking the cigarettes is bad. What's the identity that drives it? Because if she sees that as bad, what identity is she reinforcing? And the reason I say this is because she's done all the work, right? For years, the work. And so I keep doing this stupid bad thing. Well, maybe the implication is that you're fulfilling on a part of yourself that feels bad and stupid by doing something that shows you that's true. And when we were able to back engineer it and she was able to release herself from that, the behavior left. She was able to put the behavior down permanently. She no longer needed the universe to justify the belief in herself that she's bad and stupid. She didn't need
Love
to
it.
find something bad and stupid to do. Do you know what I mean? So without shifting in some way the identity, and it's not about creating a false reality in your head where you just suddenly decide. It can happen like that. I wish it didn't for me though. It's it's deeper than that. It's really allowing yourself to touch that part of yourself that still feels like that, because the reality is she didn't decide that about herself when she was 22 or 32 or 42. She decided that about herself when she was really young, and she never really let herself touch that and feel the reality of it so that that part of herself could be loved into wholeness, right? So it's not exactly that, but it's like that. So changing behaviors in a lot of ways just is, it shifts the same pattern onto something else. And I'm sure a lot of your community has had that experience, right? It just shows up somewhere else.
Mhm, mhm.
Because you
So
asked, why are we here? Like, why are we here in the beginning? It ties into that. I'll stop in a second. Is because the life that I've chosen is going to reveal to me, it's going to show to me where I believe I'm not already free. You see, I'm going to bring to myself circumstances, events, and people that are going to trigger me based on the story that I tell myself about who I'm not. But without the right approach, it just becomes pointing a finger to the outside and going like, screw them, screw that. And sometimes that feels good, but as a general approach, it's not very productive.
but Narayan, h- I'm thinking, how does this relate to what we've been doing the last 25 years? And how do you use all of those things, not only to, how do you use those things to come to know what you really are?
The practice that we have allows us to let go of trying to fix the past, resist the past, and change the past. and really give access to what the present moment truly is, right? Everybody's heard it, just be present. You just got to be present, right? We all know that, and it's true. But everything that we experience because of the habit in our personalities, in our mind, in the way our society is set up, is that everything of value is something that happens to me, right? So everything happens to me. Love happens to me. Freedom happens to me. Peace happens to me, right? It becomes an experience outside of me. And all
Mhm.
kinds of twisted things come, like hold on to it permanently, see how long you can stay there. That's all of that, excuse my French, but all of that bullshit is a, a cover on the doorway to what it is we really want. When, if the present moment isn't something that happens to me, what's the only option? The present moment is me,
Yeah.
not the person. But the present moment is the awareness which is experiencing all of this. You are the present moment. So telling somebody that they're not present is reinforcing a lie. But allowing yourself to be aware of what you're present to allows you to access the why behind the choice. Right? So everything we've been doing in the last 25 years is absolutely stunning because it gives you access to the space that lets everything in, the space of the awareness that you are. Not the space of an experience outside of you, although it can happen like that, but the space that you are. And that kind of breath happens when the possibility arises, just there, that when you recognize that you don't get to become free, you are freedom. You don't get to become peaceful. Your essential nature is peace. And it's different. And so just closing your eyes for a few minutes a couple of times a day creates massive propulsion behind the experience of growth because it allows us to let go just for a little minute of the whole tragic comedy of the ego's approach to life. But it's never been intended to be a place where you push life aside. It's where you lose your identification so fully with the limitations of it that you can embrace it and live it in a different way.
Phenomenal.
And that's what I mean when I say what you're looking for is you. It's become so incredibly clear. I'm willing to be wrong on this, but right now I don't see this. I don't see the opportunity for that. While what we think we're looking for is an experience outside of us in any way, then we will always be victims of circumstances.
Mhm. Mhm.
But the only thing you can never be victim to is your own essential beingness, your existence. You exist. Everybody can understand, everybody can touch just for a moment that sweet, so simple reality that right now you exist. And how do I exist when I'm not aware of that? I exist on the ideas in my head, right? Other people's expectations of how I should be, my expectations, which are not my own, of how I should be. Um, all of the things that I can't do, won't be able to do, can't, you know what I mean? The can't, the should, the have to, all of that oppressive stuff that pours down on top of us and we just call it life. Well, there's a version of you which is already free of that. The vast majority of you is already free of that, actually. So
Mhm.
in the absence of the belief that that's true, what becomes available to you?
This is difficult in some moments, is that trying to continue on with the interview, and I'm just blissed out, just resting in this presence, in this spaciousness. But I want you to talk about how the practice of ascension is a tool that assists with what you're talking about, how it helps someone recognize that.
Yeah. That's a great question too. I mean, the nature of it is in the energy and the vibration behind the techniques themselves, you know, because as you know, and a lot of people here probably know because of your giving and the way you share it, that they're, you know, the basis of it is praise and gratitude and love, right? And but what it does is it allows you mechanically, if you pay attention, it surrenders all of the beliefs in different areas, right? Your subjective experience, the experience of your world around you and the body that you inhabit, and in your relationship to your creator. It allows you to release that one belief that underlies basically all human suffering in a way, other than existential suffering, physically, I mean, releases us from the source of the suffering, which is just simply the belief that right now and up until right now in this moment, everything is wrong. There's something wrong with everything. There's something wrong with me. Right? Is it ideal? Is it the way you would want it? No, that's not it either. It's not picking up the belief everything's perfect. It's just dropping the idea that there's something wrong, right? And that idea is something that already existed within virtually everybody. And when we release ourselves from the belief that there's something wrong, we can start to see reality. We can start to see things in a different way. When you're no longer fighting what's already in front of you, you have a lot of your creative energy back. I would suggest to you, you start to tap into all of your creative energy. You know, as human beings, we are a God force of creative potential. Like you can see it. It's like this explosion of like toroids of light coming out through somebody. It's incredible. A volcanic eruption of God force coming through you. And how do we use it? it, we wrestle a lot with the past. We try to change the past, right? And even in terms of our normal experience of the past, you know, probably from your history, but if not from other people, you know how much of that energy we waste on trying to change the past, trying to make the past better, right? Don't even get started on the future yet. This is just the past. But here's the magic of the past, right? This is a big deal that by definition, the past is anything that's already happened, right? So you're sitting here right now looking at a computer, having a chat with me. You're in a physical environment. And so the mind will tell you what you're in is the present moment, but you're not. Why? Because you're experiencing something that's already happened, right? So even by trying to fight what we see right in front of us, outside of physical danger, get yourself the hell out of there, of course, right? But it's that amount of energy that we spend and that we waste trying to change that which has already happened. And so the first commitment really is like to make a promise to yourself to stop trying to change something that's already happened at the level at which it's already happened, right? There's a certain amount of reconciliation that probably needs to take place, but that's a whole different issue. Because that's the window to what I was talking about, that the present moment is not something that has already happened. It's not something that's happening to you. The present moment is the awareness within which all of this occurs. Your awareness, right? The unconditioned you, the you that's no longer a victim to the story that you tell yourself. And so that's where creative possibility lies, right there, because what's possible in that field? What's possible if you no longer need to change what's happened up until this point? If you no longer need to change anything that's right in front of you now, what becomes available to you? A whole lot more possibility. Because now you're at the level of identity. It's not the world, it's what the world tells you who you are, the meaning you've given it, the identity that it reflects back to you. I'm not worthy, I'm not enough. I'm not free, I'm not capable. Who knows? I don't know, and that's the nature of possibility too. It's this huge field of who knows, I don't know.
Yes.
But we're so certain about all of the other stuff based on who we think we are. We're so certain of that that it seems like that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it isn't. So what's the value of the practice is because it gives you an intimate relationship with that idea of who you are and with the space of awareness that's already present. You start to touch that space, and so many people already know this, right? This isn't news to anybody, but when you really start to touch that space, like if anybody listening to this, if you've never entertained this before, like if just for a moment you could touch a space where there was nothing wrong with you, just that, where you've always been and you are right now exactly what you've been created to be. You know, if I could reach into your head and just pull out that one idea that you're not enough, or that you're not safe, or that you're not loved, or that you're not held, how different could your world look? How different could the rest of your life be? And that's the unasked question at the bottom of each of those techniques that we have. They directly move someone's awareness into that space of who they already are, free of the beliefs, right? It does a huge amount of the work for you.
It, mm, mhm, mm, so beautiful. I had a remembrance of reading one of the books that connected to our lineage when before I learned the techniques, before I did my weekend course, flashing back to what feels like a completely different life. It was believing so completely that there was something more for me, and yet believing a little bit more than that, that I couldn't have it, that it was away, far, far, far away from me, that there was no reconciliation between where I was at and that. And throwing that book across the room in my dramatic endeavor. I'm sick of hearing other people's experiences and feeling so like it was just not possible. Absolutely not possible for me to be that, to know that I am love, that I am presence, that I am power, that I am eternity, that I am God, whatever way you want to say that, all of those things. And I can say today that I have that experience and not thoughts about it where I'm trying to talk myself into that being the truth. And it came directly from the practice that we have and from the redirection, the mirroring from yourself and a few others, you know. It's been so valuable in the moments where things felt so very real to be re-identified with this sensation, this visceral feeling that I'm not safe and I'm not worthy, and the circumstances are demonstrating it to me, and I'm stuck in that, like captured by it, bewitched by it, whatever you want to say. To be able to have people to reach out to who know otherwise, you know. And I just want to thank you. I just want to thank you for that.
Yeah. It's what we do for each other, isn't it? I love that. I love that.
And so I want to just also say that anything that Narain has shared here today and anything that anyone's heard me or felt from me, seen in me, many people reach out and say, you're seeing something in Narain, or there's just something about this, that, or the other thing with me. Um, in essence, that it's possible. It's here, it's in you already, or you wouldn't be recognizing it. You know, Narain, can you just speak to that really quickly?
That is exactly the truth right there. You just said it. Yeah, anything that you draw to yourself that inspires you, you drew it, right? That's the thing. It's part of this is taking full responsibility. And you see someone healing, it's because that's you're drawing that to yourself to show you that that's part of your journey. You see someone talking about, even the first time you hear it. When I first met the Ishayas and I heard them talking about real freedom, I came alive because it wasn't because it was new. Even though I didn't remember hearing it, it was like something in me was coming alive. It's like I know that. That's what I want. What did I want more than anything? What was my highest desire? To be totally free. Totally free. And I set it up perfectly to discover that, right? I set it everything up perfectly to discover that. But that's the truth of it. Anything that you see, anything that comes into your awareness that inspires you, you drew that to yourself. That possibility is showing itself. You're showing yourself that possibility.
So powerful, really beautifully empowering, and so true. And it's just all that I want is for anybody viewing this to know that this isn't Narayan, it isn't Rodasi, it isn't anything other than what you already are. And that's just makes my heart sing, knowing that some of you watching are going to have an expansion of that and a desire to like stabilize or be able to enjoy the re living reality of that more fully, more of the time. And we're here for you for that, uh, for sure. I'm going to be sharing more about specifically about the practice ongoing, and Narayan has different training opportunities and retreats that he does, often not on this continent here in the United States, but I know some of you will be watching from other continents. And currently, you're in Spain. You'll be doing some things in the UK and Spain. You have things set up in other places. And then you're going to have a website. I know it's not ready yet, but very excited about that. I'll be sharing that information with folks later as well. And just any final thoughts that you would like to end on here today to leave folks with, Narain?
Thoughts in any particular direction?
I know. Well, I guess if someone is watching this and they are feeling that resonance coming alive in them, and they're going to want to know what to do next, what would you tell them?
If there's if you're interested in especially the practice of ascension, as Rodasi is talking about it, then contact Rodasi and find a way to learn. Because I'm not saying it's better than the practice you have. If you have a practice, then knock yourself out and go for it. But if you don't, and you want a tool that is a massive propeller for growth in pretty unlimited ways, then I can't recommend anything higher. Um, and then reach out to, if you're feeling stuck on something, or if there's something you can't see, the blind spot to why you're doing something, why you're feeling a certain way, then reach out and find someone who can help you. There's lots of people in the world who can. It's just as long as they understand that it comes down to who you believe you are and not the circumstances, right? What's the implication of stuff? Whatever is happening, what does it imply about me? And you can take a piece of paper and write it down, right? I know this is a bit exercise based, but you can, if there's something in your life that you're bumping up against, you can simply just look, what's the implication in that? What does that imply about you? In a really honest moment, and ask yourself, like, what perspective could you take that would enable you to see it differently? Because a shift in consciousness is a shift in perspective, right? A shift in identity is a shift in perspective. Like, my life is a mirror of how I have chosen to perceive myself. And that's true for all of us. But it requires a big leap in being willing to take 100% responsibility for it. I don't know how, and I don't know why, but I know I chose this, right? But there's no, I don't see a possibility where, if you have this belief, where there's some infinite creator that would create you on purpose to suffer. And if there is one of those, I want no part of it. But maybe, just maybe, I've entered into a world, and you have too, and everybody else has, where we can clearly see the ideas about ourselves that we carry. That's what we push up against. We push up against the narrative that we tell ourselves. And you mentioned earlier, the feeling that you weren't quite complete, or that you weren't quite enough, and that's a big one. But my daughter Sophia, if I went and I bought her a little doll, right, from the store, and they come in a packet, and on the back of the packet, sometimes there's a little story about that doll. It'll say, this is, Princess Sunshine or whatever, and she likes unicorns and drinks out of lemonade streams and has a little magic wand. Like, it tells you about the princess, right? But if I was to find the box that you came in from the manufacturer and I read the back of it, would it tell me this is Rodasi and she's not enough and she's not quite complete yet? And she's, you know what I mean? Is that what it would say on the back of your box?
No.
No, no. So so where does it exist?
I know that it exists in a movement of the mind.
Yeah, yeah. And so for you, you're free of that now, but for a lot of people, it still seems so real, right? But But this is what I'm talking about. If it doesn't say it on the back of your box, if that's not your manufacturing label, then is it absolutely true?
I love that.
And if it's not absolutely true, what other possibilities are there?
Hmm. So excited for everybody watching this. So excited. Hmm.
But those techniques we teach are a wonderful way to surrender all of the evidence we have for those things, right?
For those limitations, for
Yeah,
those stories
yeah,
and identifications. Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
Because once you no longer have evidence for it, it doesn't have long to stand on its own.
So true. Just quickly, and then we can wrap up. But one of the things I love about the techniques is that there's no belief required. And in fact, who cares about belief other than the beliefs that I have seen myself carry don't stand a chance compared to the truth and the resonance of what those techniques reveal as truth, the power of them to obliterate, to dissolve, to dislodge, and bring that all crumbling down um, effortlessly without taking the shovel and the pitchfork and trying to work on what I perceive as the problem from the story of the past.
Mhm.
And I think many people, like we've been trained in a culture where if I'm not doing that, then I'm being irresponsible somehow. And the great relief of releasing into over and over and over again. Uh, could say the practice, but it's not even that. It's like what is, what really is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it's funny, like the practice doesn't really heal any of that stuff, but it brings you to a direct experience of who you are in the absence of it. And
Mm.
that's the power of it. Like I said before, sometimes the desire to get beyond something just reinforces the belief that you're not already beyond it. And and this does the opposite. It, no belief is required because it brings you to experientially to who you are, whether you believe it or not. Then it's just a question of embracing it, embodying it. That's all.
Thank you so much, Narain. Thank you for your generosity of your time with me as a friend, whatever, a student, as a friend. But thank you for your generosity of time in general, all these 25 years that you've spent in service to this remembering and for your time here today, tonight.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I only hope that there's been some value in it for your audience, for your people, but it's been my absolute pleasure. And anytime, I love you very much.
Mm. Yeah, I know. I'm very blessed. Love you very much too. All right. Well, have a wonderful present moment, everybody. And if you need anything, please be in touch.